Hi, everyone. This is the Global Atheist channel, and we want to welcome. I am Phil G, the Skeptic Atheist, and we have as our guest Hein and Ian. I want each of you to say something about yourself, where you're from, what work you do, and in terms of career activism.
Yeah, well,
So
let me
yeah,
start.
yeah. So you
Okay.
could give your full name because I know you first part. It's kind of difficult to if you want to.
Okay, well, let me go then. I'm Hein, full name Magere Hein. I'm a Dutchman. I live in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And I'm an atheist who is, in the last few years, been active in Discord and YouTube's stuff like that. But I've been reading about atheism and occasionally even lecturing about atheism for 20, 30 years or something like that.
Okay.
In my real life, I'm a computer programmer,
Mhm. Okay.
and that leaves me happy to say quite a bit of time left for other things.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks, Hein. Yes, Ian.
Uh, well, Ian, I'm from the UK, and uh, I can probably bore you senseless by saying that I'm a financial advisor in my career. Um, for some reason, not everyone is as excited talking about pensions and tax as I am, but it pays the bills. It keeps me going.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of activism and so on, I recently took it upon myself to get a bit more involved politically.
Mm-hmm.
So I have become a party political candidate.
Okay.
I am signed off by one of the parties. I won't go into detail on which
Yeah.
one because I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that's a particularly fair thing to do to your
Right.
podcast. And I'm hopefully going to be standing for a position in Parliament at some stage. So
Okay.
maybe I'll be able to get a bit more actual involvement in
Mm-hmm.
setting some of the agenda that we do. And
Mm-hmm.
dare I say it, make me up a little bit for some of what the UK has done in the past. I don't think we've got a great track record, and I think really we need to be doing more. We need to be helping more
Mm-hmm.
to repair our international reputation.
Yeah, that that is really wonderful. And the here now you said the UK, I'm here in Barbados. Barbados was once a UK colony, then it became independent. It was part of the Commonwealth, we are republic last year. And so they're looking at revamping the constitution, etc., because it will be based mainly on somewhat on some of the UK
Mm.
constitution, as the Queen has head and so on at that time.
Well, King now.
No king, no, but we are not under the king anymore because we have
No.
republic, the term republic last year, and well, he was actually here for the commemoration.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember that in the news. Actually, that was
right.
it was a really interesting one because
Mm-hmm.
on the one hand, it means very little what the royal family is and does on a day to day basis, but on the other hand, it's so vitally important. It's fundamental to establishing yourself as your own nation.
Nation, yes.
Yeah, I just I can't understand why more of the Commonwealth countries haven't
Mm-hmm.
already done the same, and I firmly believe that over the next decade we're going to see
You
several
see
more.
more, yeah.
Yeah,
And the thing is that even though the UK, and this is coming around to what we are going to discuss today, even though the UK will have changed in terms of some of their human rights practices, maybe get better, especially getting away from probably the influence of the religious thinking on how you treat LGBTQ and other minority groups and so on. Barbados is still was their constitution at that time was still on the having these 18, 19th, all 19th century laws against LGBTQs and so on, which is still on the law books even now, right? And that's one of the big issues here because it lends to discrimination among the LGBTQ plus community. So based on that, can you all tell, based on what I just said, can you tell me, each of you, about human rights in your country? Before you continue, I know sometimes some people will look at countries, look at how economically successful they are, and they might think that, oh, everything is all okay with all the human rights in these countries, and I have this kind of stereotype thinking, not realizing that there may be some aspects that are not catering to human rights to people who are disabled, as I just said, the LGBTQ community, etc. Hi, Lalu.
Hi,
Welcome.
greetings. Hi, good afternoon, one and all. My apologies for being marginally late. I was on the other link. I was on the YouTube link. So, right, so I was following what you guys were saying, but I couldn't figure out how to get in. And then I realized that you had two links.
Yes, the StreamYard link.
Yeah.
Sorry
I
about
was on the
that.
YouTube link for the last 10 minutes.
You're more clear. Introduce yourself, Lalu. Tell us about what you do and your activism and so on, and where you're located.
Okay, well, good afternoon, one and all. I'm saying good afternoon because that's what it is in Barbados. I'm in Barbados, like how Philip is also in Barbados, which people would know is in the Caribbean or should know. Although I met this woman the other day who got herself a job at a local EU delegation, and she said that she's a French woman, that when she was told she was being posted to Barbados, she thought Barbados was in the Pacific, but it's not. It's in the Caribbean. Anyway, I'm a lawyer by profession. I'm originally from Guyana. I've been living in Barbados now for the last almost 16 years, living and working. I was the chair or convener of the Barbados Human Rights body, the committee set up by the Bar Association. And I've been involved in a number of human rights type cases as a lawyer. So that's me in synopsis.
Thanks, Lalu. The others, just reintroduce yourself. You don't have to go into just give your area of activism.
I already heard it, everything, because I was on
the
YouTube.
You heard. Okay, that's
so
no problem. Good.
Unfortunately, I was on the wrong link. Okay, thank you.
Right. Okay. Before we got into what I was just talking about, and Lalu, since he knows about the Barbados situation, probably even with the Caribbean situation in terms of human rights. For the audience, for persons that can you what is your understanding of human rights? Anyone can start off first.
Well, I mean, okay, since nobody else is speaking. Human rights is about basic fundamental rights that people need. I mean, obviously, we all need sustenance, we need water, we need a roof over our head. But normally, it's more political rights that people tend to focus on. To me, this is a big discussion that ought to take place between what was traditionally seen to be in the socialist world, whether you consider them actually to have been socialist, but the so-called socialist world, and the capitalist world. Because in the socialist world, they focus more on economic rights, whereas in the West, they focus more on political rights. But in fact, both rights are fundamental. The right to food, the right to housing, the right to a job. Those are important rights, but they're not normally considered to be traditional human rights. But in the context of, generally speaking, it's the right to obviously participate in electing your government, the right to be able to express your views freely without intimidation, without harassment, the right to protest, the right to publish. Those sorts of rights are the normal rights that people consider to be human rights. But I said that's in the West, but in the East, what used to be, they focus more on the economic rights, which to me is also important. And both sets of rights need to be focused on. I see in Britain now people who have been even holding up blank pieces of paper to protest against the monarchy are being harassed and subject to arrest and so on, which is quite interesting because obviously we associate that sort of thing in the West normally with North Korea and those sorts of places.
Yeah.
But of course, in reality, there's no difference. I mean, when the people are being genuinely critical of fundamental issues that exist in the West, they're just as much subject to harassment and intimidation as happens in North Korea or these other countries as well in reality.
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah, I've heard plenty of people saying that, you know, that there's a time and a place for protest, and that a funeral is the wrong place. But I mean, from the perspective of guaranteeing human rights and guaranteeing the right to protest, it makes absolutely no sense to say, oh, well, you've got freedom to protest, except at this particular juncture, this particular event. That isn't freedom. That's then saying actually you don't have the freedom to protest. You have a qualified freedom to protest if we approve of it in a certain sense, and you know that's starting down a very dangerous slope in terms of curtailing what people can do.
But of course, it's not the funeral people are protesting at; it's the the coronation that people are protesting at. So you know,
that's right.
You know,
I mean, the funeral is what, 2 days' time. So you know, any protest that happens now it's protesting during a period of mourning, or it's protesting at the wake or the vigil or whatever. But it's certainly not. You're absolutely right. It's not protesting the funeral itself, and it's certainly not saying anything about what that person thinks about what Queen Elizabeth did during her lifetime, which I think it almost goes without saying that she put a lot of effort into acting as an impartial political entity. She did a lot over the course of her life, and whether we agree or not with the concept of a monarchy, absolutely we can look up to her as an individual who gave a lot to the country as a whole.
Well, I mean, I mean, you might say I have no right to be speaking about the Queen, and I don't want this to degenerate into a monarchist sort of discussion. But I was born. I'm from British Guyana, what used to be called British Guyana. The Queen was the head of state in Guyana at that time, and in Barbados until the 30th of November, I believe it was last year, the head of state here as well. So we are as intimately involved or knowledgeable about the Queen as somebody living in Britain. And I will say that, I mean, obviously living a very enriched existence. I mean, she's one of the richest, or was one of the richest women in the world. Very privileged life. Not many of us can look forward to living to 96 with our own private doctors, etc. But then let's get into all of that. So Philip, I'm over to you.
Yeah, right. So Hein, yes.
Well, of course, I don't live in I live in the Netherlands. We have our own royal family. Let's not go into that. In general, the Netherlands are a progressive nation, and we like to pride ourselves in having a good human rights record. However, there are a few bits that are not so good. I've prepared a bit of a piece on that, but I'll do that later. I've seen some statistics where, let's say, there are international lists of human rights compliance things. We've been slipping on that. And also, I mean, there's parts of, for instance, the internet. Death threats for people you don't agree with on the internet have become very popular.
Wow.
It's just a thing. I mean, our politicians in general are rarely in danger. But just recently, there were some threats to the Prime Minister and our Crown Princes. It's all a bit messy. I'll get back to that. I mean, our political freedoms are okay. Our material freedoms, however, there are a few things. I'll get back to that.
Okay. One other thing I want to raise is also about, because earlier I raised about the LGBTQ plus issues, but also about religious freedom. Because in Barbados, we talk about the religious freedom, but it's a lot of Christianity that is the main religion that is pushed here, and I sometimes say pandered to by the government. And so, and even Lalu will tell you, in trying to come up with the constitution to remove certain terminologies in reference to God, etc., people keep noise about that, right? And it has some implications for persons living here, the rights of minority groups, minority in terms of minority religion, minority for the persons who don't hold any religion. Because especially LGBTQ, I know they are discriminated against because, again, the law books. And Lalu, can you speak to that?
Well, as you were saying, Philip, we have inherited a lot of the old colonialist laws, including the laws relating to homosexuality. They're still on the statute books here. In fact, even capital punishment, which again was an old colonialist law, is still on the statute books. So, even though we have our own constitution, under that constitution, there's something called a savings clause, which says that any act in place prior to independence will remain in place, even though it might be in conflict with the constitution. Right?
Whoa.
So that is still the case. So this is why, for example, the law relating to homosexuality is still in place. So the old British laws are still very much applicable, unless they've been directly repealed or amended by Parliament in Barbados. So homosexuality is one of the issues that is still illegal in Barbados. In terms of religion, I'm actually doing a constitutional motion at present for some Rastafarian people who want the right to be able to smoke ganja in their own homes as part of their religious beliefs. Because clearly a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist, they can say their prayers quite happily in their own homes, but they under the laws in Barbados, in fact, it was only recently amended, there's something called the Sacramental Act, which allows the smoking of ganja by Rastafarians, but only in a registered temple. And most Rastafarians don't have a registered temple. It doesn't exist. So it's a right that exists on paper, but it doesn't exist in reality. It's just a cosmetic right. So I'm now challenging that, saying that they ought to have a similar right. I mean, I myself am an atheist, but obviously in terms of their rights, I'm saying they ought to have a right to worship, in effect, in their own homes, rather than having to go to a designated, registered place of worship. So that is an example. In our court system, in terms of the religious aspect, there was a Court of Appeal matter a while back where the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, they were saying that the sentence awarded to a certain person, because this person had appealed against sentence, was the correct sentence because the person didn't have a moral compass. That's what they were arguing in the Court of Appeal. And they were saying they didn't have a moral compass because they were an atheist. So in other words, they were saying that the person deserved a longer sentence in reality, if you analyze it, because they were an atheist. So they were penalized not for the crime they allegedly committed, but for their atheism. That was the argument put forward by the DPP in the Barbados Court of Appeal, which is ridiculous. It's ludicrous.
It's ridiculous, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So even though in theory religious freedom exists, there obviously as part of religious freedom should be non-religious freedom as well. But the non-religious freedom, in fact, doesn't exist, if or not to a large extent. And in fact, the Anglican Church until 1969 was an established religion, just as in England now. You know, King Charles III, as he is, swore an oath to uphold the faith. Yeah, the faith, singular, which it was the Anglican faith, right, as part of his coronation process. So the Anglican Church is an established church in terms of protection in Britain, and the same thing applied in Barbados until 1969, which was 3 years after independence. But the biggest, in terms of the general population, the biggest human rights issues facing people is the fact that there are allegations of torture in the police detention.
Yeah.
Barbados hasn't ratified the Convention Against Torture, which would allow for international supervision unannounced of police stations, of the prison, and so on. And there's so many allegations as a criminal lawyer being made to me by my clients of being forced into making confessions. In fact, the American State Department has Barbados as on a per capita basis, in terms of the size of the population, as having the largest number of confession statements per capita in the world. Because so many people, when they're detained by police, suddenly say, okay, I did it. But what's making them say, I did it? Yeah, people are saying that there's this thing called Bagan, which is an insecticide. It's quite common in Barbados. People are saying that the police are putting paper bags over their head and spraying this insecticide into the bags until they sign a confession statement. Or they're being hit in the head by telephone directories, but telephone directories are quite heavy books, but they're being hit in the head because the bruising wouldn't show up on the head because there's hair there, and things like that to get them to confess. I had a case where a guy who's a diabetic told me that the police refused to give him any diabetic medication or any food until he signed a confession statement. And obviously diabetics, they need to eat, they need to have their medication. So that is one issue. But another issue, and it's a fundamental issue, is delays in the court system. You have matters being brought to court 14 years after somebody's charged. So how can that be just? How can they have a fair hearing? Because obviously witnesses forget, people have died, people have migrated. I don't even remember what I did last week, clearly, and to remember what happened 14 years ago is preposterous, but that is quite common. And it's even worse because Philip asked me to speak to the Caribbean issue as well. In places like Jamaica, just recently, this man died in prison in Jamaica on a murder charge, which had been pending for 40 years. So for 40 years, he was in a cell, locked up, deprived of his rights, pending a trial, which never happened. He died 40 years waiting for it. And then they subsequently did a review in the Jamaican prison system of people who had been in prison 20 years, forgetting about less than 20 years, 20 years or longer awaiting trial. And they found there were like 80 people in the Jamaican prison prison system, incarcerated, who are waiting 20 or more years for their cases to be heard. Forgetting about 19, 18, and 17 years, which is grotesque in itself. This is 20 years and over, yeah? In Guyana, where I come from, there was this woman recently who went to the media saying that she's been waiting 35 years for a divorce. 35 years. It's preposterous. It's beyond preposterous.
Yeah.
I would say it's a joke, but it's beyond that. It's a pantomime. It's a total negation of justice. And if I've said enough, I'll let you guys have your.
There's a great phrase, which is what is justice delayed is justice denied.
Yes.
That's exactly what you've just described. That's as you say, not justice.
No.
It's preposterous, yeah.
and it's a serious violation of people's rights, whether or not the person committed the crime. It's a serious violation of a human right.
Yeah.
For the
Everyone is presumed to
person,
be innocent until proven guilty. So all these people are
yes,
in law presumed to be innocent. So you have innocent people incarcerated, as in the case of that guy in Jamaica, for
yes,
40 years, totally deprived of their freedoms, and
freedoms,
then
yes.
they die, and there's no trial.
Yeah.
Well, so, Ian and Hein, can you speak about situations in your um, countries in terms of that, or is it similar, or is it
I have
they tend
an
to be,
example.
if you know?
It's different, but it's
Mm-hmm.
something that at least worries me.
Mm-hmm.
First, let me share a bit of the map. Hang on a second. I want. There. A little map of my nation. I live in
Mm-hmm.
Rotterdam. This is also total nation. This here is the little town in the middle of nowhere of Ter Apel. It has one important bit, and that is a refugee center where every refugee who enters the Netherlands
Mm-hmm.
needs to report to get into the mechanism of being recognized as a refugee. During the pandemic, there weren't too many refugees coming in, so it scaled down quite a bit. But earlier this year, that COVID-19 measures have been relaxed, and of course that there's a war on in Ukraine, numbers of refugees have risen considerably, and they've run out of space. So, since roughly May till very recent, let's say last week, people have been sleeping outside that refugee center. People absolutely innocent of anything, just because they were there and they couldn't be. The system was too slow working to get them into proper housing, and that. There's more things to that. I'll get back to that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll show you a photo of how that looks. No, that was not the right one. Sorry. Yeah, I'm improvising a bit.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Just a sec. Oh. Sorry for.
No problem. In the meantime, boys, Hein is the time for the picture. The speaking to what Lalu was referring to is going on in the other
There we are.
Caribbean countries. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So people have been sleeping in tents or under essentially tarpaulins held up.
Wow.
It was a terrible mess, and at moments there was something like 700 people.
Wow.
And well, there are both national, and we have a national charity to assist refugees, Vluchtelingenwerk.
Mm-hmm.
They have started a court case against the state to redress this.
Mm-hmm.
But there are deeper problems. I mean, the problem is municipalities are, let's say, asked by the government to, make place, and municipalities aren't fond of that. There's quite a bit of NIMBYism going on. And so it's essentially poor municipalities that get stuck with these kind of centers. Because rich ones can just say no, and the government can force municipalities, but they prefer not to because, the voters.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's getting a real mess. And I mean, I'm really concerned that, well, essentially human rights of these refugees are being hurt. At least their
Right.
health is being hurt. In August, in one of those centers, an infant died. It's not clear why and how, but
Wow.
presumably, I mean, even the ordinary cleanliness things in those centers itself are in trouble. So we're not good there, and this is very concerning. I mean,
Wow.
people are working on it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
slowly, and because many of our municipalities won't work with the government here,
Mm-hmm.
it won't be going anywhere soon.
Yeah.
So that's the trouble.
Wow. 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 Oof. Ah. Um.
Ian.
Yeah, Ian. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess coming back to what Lalu was saying, I think one of the nice things about living where I live, which is London, incidentally, is that it's just enormously cosmopolitan. There's people from all over the world. There's people from all different outlooks, different lifestyles, different starting points in life, and so on. So there is this opportunity to meet all sorts of people, and as a result, you know, I'm really privileged. I've been invited to probably about 10, 15 weddings over the last 10 or 15 years. And that does include a couple who happen to be homosexuals. They're lesbians. They're good friends of my wife's, and you know, I'd like to say good friends of mine now. The world has definitely, certainly here, has moved on. It's accepted that, you know, not everyone has the same outlook in life. Not everyone is going to be religious. Not everyone is going to follow these archaic laws against a fundamental facet of human nature.
Yeah.
So it's genuinely reassuring to see that. But unfortunately, then you go to the other end of the spectrum, like Hein was mentioning, and you know, I think if anything, we're probably even worse when it comes to looking after refugees, because we have developed this horrific system where anyone seeking asylum in the UK is going to be shipped to Rwanda, of all places. Which is just absolutely gut wrenching when you think about the difficult journey that that migrants or refugees have to even get here in the first place. We've shut down every legal route that we possibly can for them to get in, and then when they finally get here, rather than treating them with compassion, we're going to ship them off halfway around the world to a country where there are genuine human rights concerns, and somehow we think that's for the best.
That's okay. Jeez. Because even I have been following that is going on, and it's very heart wrenching. And I think sometimes what happens is that some countries forget that it was immigrants that helped build up the wealth of the country, helped build the country. You know, I mean, even seeing that in the United States, so they begin event towards immigrants. The United States is a country of immigrants, but a lot of immigrants have come in.
It's even worse for the UK because we didn't just invite immigrants in to help us. We actually went and took their stuff. It's so much worse.
It's worse. Yeah. And I remember Barbados, the UK needed bus drivers and other thing. they came to the Caribbean, offered jobs to people in the Caribbean, and people came in. I know you have. That's where you end up, not only Caribbean, probably for India and so on. That's where you end up with a lot of a wide variety of different ethnicities there in England, the UK, and they have helped build up the system. It's not like they came to just live off the system, you know, and that's what people need to understand. That immigration issues are human rights issues.
Yeah.
You know, it's human rights issues. And if you really care about people, you will try in all things to help those persons. And those persons do normally come and contribute. Sometimes they come and contribute more than the very same people who grew up in your country. You know, I teach, and I have seen students come from other islands, from other countries, and make use of the educational system here, where you have some children from here who grew up here and they don't care. You know, but those people come and they contribute, and then you want to treat them like trash?
Yeah.
Seriously?
That's not right.
It's not right at all. Something you mentioned, Ian, then you were talking about, no, it's not divorce. That raised something in my mind. In terms of, I was going to ask this question in terms of rape. Is it considered over there that a woman who is married or a spouse who is married cannot be considered to be raped? Because I know there's some Caribbean islands that
so that used
Barbados,
to be the case.
I think,
used to be the case until I think embarrassingly recently that was correct, but now absolutely not. If anyone withdraws consent, then it's considered rape. It doesn't matter whether you're married to them. It doesn't matter whether you've been dating them for 20 years. It doesn't matter if you just met them on a night out. That they've given consent and they withdraw it halfway through. As soon as the consent is withdrawn, that becomes a crime.
Lalu, is it Barbados is similar to the UK in that sense? No, right?
I believe they've changed the law.
I think they've changed law.
But just following up on some of the other comments made beforehand. I agree with you, Philip, what you were saying about immigration and so on. The Tories in England, some of them, they say London is not a British city anymore. It's a foreign city. That's the term they use, right? It's a foreign city. In other words, saying so many immigrants are coming, it's a foreign city. But really what they should be saying is it's an international city.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. It's an international city. And why is it an international city? Because of the legacy of empire. London was the capital of empire. So all that's happening is, it's like Istanbul or Constantinople as it once was, right? When you go there, you have people who in the past have migrated from China and all different parts of the Ottoman Empire, right? So just like Constantinople stroke Istanbul was the former capital of an empire, and you have you see it in people's facial features, people looking Oriental, all different sort of racial mixes, African and so on, because of the fact it was an empire capital, right? So likewise, London is an empire capital. So these are the children of empire in reality that you're seeing. But I just wanted to say that if you don't mind. Wanted to
that's great. That's a very good point.
We get often referred to very it's almost stated like an insult, but I don't think anyone in London actually takes it as one. So people refer to here as Londonistan, which is just, first of all, it's ignorant of where the vast majority of people in London actually hail from. And it's generally part of sort of Islamophobia because Sadiq Khan, who is Mayor of London, is a practicing Muslim. So there's a huge amount of racism associated with that as an attack on the city as a whole.
Whoa.
But in reality, I think most of us that live here, we accept and embrace the fact that this is a multicultural city. It's a cosmopolitan city. There's all walks of life represented here, and generally, I think London itself, ignore the rest of the UK for the moment, but London itself really does try to be as welcoming as possible to as many different varieties of people as possible, because we're ultimately stronger as a society if we welcome as many people as possible.
But what a lot of people forget in these discussions is they speak about immigration, but they don't talk about emigration. If you look, for example, I think the Republic of Ireland, I'm not talking about the whole of Ireland, the Ulster part, just the Republic of Ireland, they've got a population of just over 5 million people, yes, and in the Republic. But the Irish descendant population in America alone, forget about South Africa and Australia, is over 70 million. 70 million, right? So little Ireland with a population of 5 million, I'm talking about the Republic, they have a descendant population in the United States of America alone of over 70 million. Yes.
Whoa.
Yes. And the same thing applied with the Anglo-Saxons and so on in terms of migration and to all parts of the world. Yes. I mean, even recent migration in a place like Cyprus, there's something like 100,000 British passport holders, British people. Living in Nicosia and other places, So obviously we know Spain and so on. So we must also look at the emigration issue.
Right?
People talk only about immigration, but you must talk about the emigration issue as well. And of course, in terms of the Anglo-Saxons, people talk about Islam and as being a young religion, which it is. I mean, it's 600 years younger than Christianity, but what they don't also talk about is in fact the Anglo-Saxons have been there in Britain for less than the age of Islam. Yes, they only started coming in about 800 AD from Germany and so on. Right? It's a Celtic country, and Celts have been pushed into areas like Wales and Scotland. But in fact, it's a Celtic country, and people hear about Queen Boadicea. And now I see that there's a statue erected to her in Parliament Square or just by Westminster Bridge there. But she was not an Anglo-Saxon. She was fighting against the Romans. When the Romans were there were no Anglo-Saxons. There were no Trusses and Camerons and Johnsons. They were in Germany. The Anglo-Saxons are immigrants.
Yeah.
They are immigrants. In fact, not only immigrants, they're economic migrants. They're economic migrants. So Britain, as it is a nation of economic migrants. Again, all of these things aren't mentioned. People don't know their history. I was traveling on a bus in London. I went up to London. I was traveling on a bus, and some guy comes to me and tells me I'm a Paki, and I should go home. I said, well, okay, I'm happy to go home, wherever home might be, but we can go home together. You can go back to Germany, and I can go back to wherever. Yes. And he says, what does Germany have to do with it? Yeah, right. They don't know their roots. They don't know their history.
Oh boy, that's the problem. That's one of the problem when it comes to immigration and immigration rights is people forget their past, or they don't know their past, or they're given false information about their past. It's sad that these things are happening because, as we see, it does affect human rights issues for people. Because if you can look at Lalu and this time, but going back to Pakistan, when Lalu is not from Pakistan, because it's these stereotypes. Because a lot of people have stereotypes in these countries, which typical notions, and that's why I said earlier when I was talking about breaches of human rights in terms of seeing economic stability and so on. is like stereotypes. Persons have these stereotypes which impact on human rights issues, especially towards persons who they see as coming from outside. And it is something that we as activists have to, I think, we're persons who really know the history to make people aware that y'all are your foreparents are immigrants, your foreparents were immigrants, right? And they
Yep.
were some of them were running from persecution, some was running from economic, just like what is happening now. It's not any different.
Yeah.
And if they were rejected, you won't be here now.
I was at the bus stop at the Elephant and Castle in South London. Ian would know where that is, yes? Queuing for a bus, number 53 bus, I think it was. And you probably know the number of the bus as well, right? Anyway,
I very much don't.
Yeah, you don't know number 53, but anyway.
No. Anyway, I haven't memorized the entire bus route. No, I'm not quite that geeky.
It runs from Plumstead, I believe, all the way to Trafalgar Square or something like that. Yeah, but anyway, and I was queuing for this bus at the Elephant and Castle, and there were like 5 people in front of me, and a guy came, an English guy, came and stood behind me, and I was just about to board the bus. It was an orderly queue, but the bus driver said, "Okay, that's it. Nobody else can come in because the buses tend to get full." Yeah, and the guy behind me told me, he said, "My father fought in the Second World War, so the likes of you could get on the bus before me." That's what he told me. I was before him in the queue, right? Right. That's what he told me. Right. So I did engage with him. But the reality is my father was a doctor from Guyana, and he went in the Second World War, and he worked in hospitals in Manchester during the Second World War. Right. So my father was there getting bombed, just as his father was there getting bombed. Right. But of course, he doesn't know my personal history. Right. But he said his father fought in the Second World War, so the likes of me get on the bus before him, as if I had jumped the queue or something. I was there before him in the queue, and the driver allowed me on, and then he wanted to close the doors. And this guy is telling me that his father died in the Second World War, so the likes of me can get on the bus before him. It's interesting how people's minds work.
It is, and sadly, there are people that will just clobber you with any perceived advantage that they can think of, and it just goes to show, doesn't it, that was not the winning strategy that he thought it was. It was factually not true, and it was just, unfortunately, thinly veiled racism, it seems, and that's tragic. That's just not.
But anyway, I don't
tolerate.
want to put Ian on the back foot, metaphorically speaking. There are lots of beautiful, wonderful British people. I mean, I was up in Wales, and there was a guy there operating the Menai, the bridge. There's a bridge, it's not called the Menai Bridge, but it's near Carnarvon. There's a pedestrian bridge linking one side of the bay to the other. And, he was such a beautiful guy, a guy called Jones. Well, everybody in Wales is called Jones, really, aren't they? Right? It's an exception not to be called Jones. Anyway, he was such a great guy, an old guy, and I had wonderful conversations with him. And so I'm saying, we mustn't also stereotype the British as being racist.
Correct.
There's a minority, and of course, Brexit has also brought out this same sort of streak in people. And
yes,
at the end of the day, we have to blame
I could go on at great length about Brexit, but that's probably not a good idea to get me started on that.
So basically, then, all what we are saying, then, what you said then, that the human rights is based on well-being. Let me look at human rights. Hein?
Yeah, there's not very much I can add to this. I mean, there's a few things I recognize. I live in Rotterdam, the largest city in the Netherlands. Very much variety in where people come from. Something like half the population has an immigration background. And quite a large part of that, by the way, is from Suriname, a nation you may know about, Lalu.
Correct. Yeah.
The one to the east of Guyana.
Correct.
What used to be a Dutch colony until 1975. So, and when it got its independence, a large part of Suriname moved to the Netherlands, and their descendants, and some of them from that time, still live here, and a good size of them in Rotterdam. We're, well, sort of used to it now. But the immigrants that moved in of Turkish and Moroccan descent, whose parents immigrated in the 1960s, 70s, as well, because of labor opportunities, we had more work than people to do it. So we recruited people in Turkey and Morocco and a few other nations. And their descendants still live here. And that's occasionally a problem, particularly, of course, because they're Muslims. And the Netherlands isn't particularly religious. I mean, less than half the people believe in a God. Something like 10% of the people go to church or mosque every week. Most of those are Muslims, not Christians. So, and there is a considerable anti-Muslim political movement, unfortunately.
Wow.
I mean, they're not saying it out loud, but I mean, they call themselves anti-immigration or something like that, but it's about Muslims.
Wow.
What I find interesting is France's position as far as Turkey joining the European Union is concerned, right? They say that the official French position is that Turkey shouldn't join the EU because it's not part of Europe. Yes, but if you look at the map of France, I mean, right here in the Caribbean, we have Guadeloupe and Martinique, Guyana, which is even further east. We have places in the Indian Ocean, we have in the Pacific Ocean that are parts of France, departments of France. And I don't understand how logically they can even contemplate putting forward such an argument when they themselves are the EU exists in the Caribbean, the EU exists in South America. Right, so if and it's because of France, and even up in Canada, there's an island there near Prince Edward Island or something that is a French island. Yeah, so I find it very interesting. Yeah? And then they say they're a secular society, but if you look at their national holidays, they're all Christian holidays. They're all Christian holidays, and Notre Dame burns down, and the state rebuilds it. If a mosque were to burn down, would the state rebuild it?
But
It's interesting.
That's the disparities that you're seeing even here, because as I told you, Barbados in the Caribbean, Barbados is almost like a microcosm of the Caribbean, especially English-speaking Caribbean. There's a lot of it's Christianity, but because of the large majority being Christianity, it is like a privilege. So in schools, you will find that in public schools, Christianity is pushed as the main religion. They have Christian devotion prayers during full assemblies, during they call it farm prayers, year prayers, right? Because of this privileged position, forgetting that Barbados is a pluralistic society. We claim to be secular, but just like what Lalu just said, the whole France will go and build the church, right? Yeah, they're probably more secular than Barbados, but still pandering to a certain religion. Therein lies the problem, especially problem for human rights, because a lot of these laws are based on religious, especially Christian religious thinking, and it affects other human beings that are not part of that group. All right, and basing the laws on a particular religious group, that's wherein you have problems. Because if you look at history, whenever any Christian sect, any religious sect took over political power, everybody else suffered. Every other sect within that particular religion suffered. persecution ensues, people's rights are violated. And I know some of them don't get that, right? And this is something that we constantly have to be fighting against. Yes. Another thing that I wanted to ask the panelists, will you say there are rights that still we as or in your society have not agreed upon as human rights? Or is there is there conflict about what is some things are considered if this is really a human right or not?
I think that's probably yes. Within the UK, we're in a very interesting position because the UK was signed up to the EU Human Rights Act, and with Brexit, there was a huge push to effectively repeal that and replace it with a Human Rights Act that was set up by the UK. But what you can already see, and it was mentioned earlier that people are being arrested for protesting the monarchy at the moment.
Right.
There's worry that actually what we're going to be doing is taking a step back in terms of what is protected, what is allowed. Just because we have the freedoms to do something doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to go out and do it en masse. So, just because the freedom exists to protest at a royal wedding or a royal funeral doesn't mean that every single person in the country is suddenly going to go and protest at it.
Right.
But everyone should have the right to decide for themselves whether that's something that they want to do, and they should be allowed to do that without getting arrested.
I mean, there's an interesting bit to that. I mean, the UK is still a member of the European Convention for the Human Rights. I mean, you didn't check that out with the membership of the EU.
Not yet.
And I've heard that if the current Westminster government has any say in that, you'll leave that as well.
That would not surprise me.
And that would be deeply worrying.
Yes.
Yes,
this is the point I just wanted to raise with Ian, because in fact, the Brexiteers, they were trying to conflate the European Convention of Human Rights with being a member of the EU, in their confused, wishy-washy, muddying thing. But in fact, they're two separate things totally. There's nothing. In fact, most of Europe, I believe even Russia is a signatory to the Convention against European Convention on Human Rights. So it has nothing to do with being a member of the EU. But of course, the Brexiteers were saying, because the EU court, the European court in Strasbourg, has ruled, for example, that prisoners have a right to vote, which is correct. I mean, they're living under the system. But that was a big write-up in papers like, you remember, the News of the World and the Sun and so on, right?
Sadly, yes. I remember seeing the headlines. So that I don't read in either of those two publications, but it's hard not to see the headlines anyway.
Yeah, correct.
So go ahead, Lalu.
No, I'm just saying that the Sun is such an influential paper in Britain that maybe some people buy it for page 3. I don't know. But the page 3 is normally a semi-naked woman on it. But apparently, they whichever party they support in an election in Britain at election time, general election, wins the election. They're so they have such a great influence. And of course, they're not a British-owned paper. They're owned by this Australian magnate,
Murdoch, aren't they?
Murdoch, right?
Yes.
Right. You got to press Murdoch paper,
Okay. There are 2 questions. Right. The first question: what type of laws do your countries have to protect minorities? That's for Cat Eunice.
I'm thinking about that. I mean, we have, I think the main part is we have a sort of, Equal Rights Act that essentially institutes that law, the government, semi-government organizations and employers may not discriminate for race, religion, language, all kinds of that. And we have particular courts handling complaints in that respect. While those courts have not the same legal position as our legal courts, essentially their verdicts are followed and eventually get something like strength of law. So that works reasonably well, but it's not perfect, and our courts regularly intervene in civil stuff on civil rights rules, and occasionally can go to Strasbourg for advice.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah, Ian, and then Lalu.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that the protections in the UK are, like most of our laws, a complete mess. We don't have a single sort of written constitution or Bill of Rights. I mean, we do have something that is referred to as a Bill of Rights, but ultimately most things seem to descend from the Magna Carta, and then substantial differences of opinion over the years, and then occasional statutes and so on. One thing that is possibly not clear just from looking at the screen at the moment is that I suppose technically I fit into the category of I am a minority in that I have a disability. I struggle to get about, so I'm not visibly a minority. I'm not I have an invisible problem, basically. In my own case, I am looked after by the Equal Rights Act and the I think it's the Disability Act. So those effectively provide a framework of safety nets for my particular set of circumstances. That means that employers have to do a certain thing, government bodies have to do a certain thing. It's by no means perfect, and I am embroiled in a couple of court cases at the moment, which are a direct result of institutions not following those particular guidelines very well. But yeah, that's really where we stand, is that there is protection, but unfortunately it's down to the individual to familiarize themselves with the law and really push for it themselves. So it's not a straightforward thing.
Okay. That's Lalu.
Yeah, of course, the difference between the crucial difference in a way between Barbados and Britain is that Barbados has a written constitution. Britain doesn't have a written constitution. So there's a need to pass laws like the Race Relations Act in the 60s, the Homosexuality Act, and the Sex Discrimination Act in the 75, I think it was. But in Barbados, those rights are enshrined in the constitution as constitutional rights. So people could bring a constitutional motion based on the articles in the constitution. So in the context of Barbados, they've seen little need to have specific acts governing race issues or whatever, because it's already in the constitution. The constitution covers that. And Barbados is a signatory to lots of international conventions as well, dealing with whatever, which the Caribbean Court of Justice has ruled that it's possible that those can be applicable in domestic law. But I take the point that Ian is making there, that we need to have things specifically dealing with, for example, with disability rights,
right,
and that sort of thing. That is missing. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, that homosexuality is still illegal in Barbados.
Yeah,
it's not covered in our act. And there's nothing in our constitution which says that you have a right to be an atheist, but you said it does say that you have a right to freedom of thought, and also to your have your own creed.
Okay.
So it's under that sort of concept that we would have our atheist rights, as it were.
Right. Is it right? The last question from the audience is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights used much abroad in law or referred to?
In the Netherlands, I'd say rarely. I mean, for us, for Dutch law and law practice, the European Convention is very much actual. We use it, it works. And as I said before, occasionally courts refer to Strasbourg questions and even decisions. So, yes, that has. And of course, the European Convention, what's in there, is pretty much universal human rights list. I mean, there are differences, but I couldn't list them. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Ian and Lalu?
Pretty much the same, I would say. You know, we have been governed for years by the European Convention, and it's only now that actually we're looking to deviate from that, and that hasn't happened yet, but it's on the horizon. So any reference that the European Convention on Human Rights makes to the universal, or the what was I can't remember the exact wording of the question, but but that there we go, Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Human rights.
If the European Convention refers to that, then indirectly, I guess we refer to it as well. But watch this space. We don't really know what's going to happen with human rights in this country.
Right. Lalu, and before you start, Lalu, when you're finished talking about that, you can start us off. Well, we are going to soon finish, but I want each person to be able to say what is the way forward.
What is?
Right? What are your suggestions on the way forward with dealing with human rights, especially those that are not on the books? The ones, what was the way forward? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. In terms of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, I've actually used it in a court case to do with a Haitian refugee here in Barbados. Barbados hasn't ratified the Refugee Convention, which is a 1953 or 52 convention. They have not ratified it. And there was a Haitian guy who was seeking political asylum based on being persecuted in Haiti. And I also relied on that UN declaration. So, I have used it personally as a persuasive argument, as it were. Yeah? In terms of the way forward, Barbados, now that it's no longer a monarchy since November last year, end of November, we are now in the process of writing a new constitution. And I had proposed that amongst the constitutional articles, there should be one governing the setting up of a human rights commission so that people can directly approach the Human Rights Commission. I believe New Zealand has something along those lines.
Okay.
They can bring matters. We have the standard issues of in terms of gay rights and stuff like that. But people might feel that their rights have been trampled on for whatever, and they should be able to approach the commission directly rather than having to go through an expensive court process. Constitutional motions and so on. They should have forms that can be filled in, and people can just bring a complaint to the commission. So that is what I had proposed in terms of Barbados.
Wonderful. Ian, and then Hein.
I think probably, and it's going to sound very trite indeed, but I would say probably the best way forward for everyone is to remember there's a wonderful line from, I think it's Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, which is just be excellent to one another. If we can all do that and we can all try to do that, then I think we can make a massive difference just in how everyday life is experienced by everyone.
Well said. Hein?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's difficult to say for, let's say, the Netherlands. I mean, there are a few interesting bits. I mean, for instance, there are a few bits of the Netherlands left in the Caribbean. And part of those are independent countries. They have their own governments. And, well, while there is a governor to represent our king, he has no direct political power. Unless, of course, things go wrong, then he has all the political power. But okay, let's not go there. But there are also 3 small islands that are parts of European Netherlands. They're municipalities in our nation, but they're far away, so I rarely know anything about that. As far as I'm aware, there are no particular human rights problems, but there are serious political problems with, what do you call that? People who essentially put their friends in positions of power, nepotism, and corruption, of course. But that's also a thing in the European part of the Netherlands. They're far from unique in that. I think that an improvement would be a shorter road to access to something like a Human Rights Commission or maybe even a constitutional court. I mean, constitution in the Netherlands is a bit difficult. Our courts cannot judge on the constitutionality of laws. It's a weird thing. I mean, all kinds of what the government does can be and will be checked by courts, but laws not. I mean, the legal doctrine is that Parliament is sovereign in that. I'm not a lawyer. There are reasons for that, but shorter routes to courts I think should be quite an improvement. I mean, I know that civil rights cases can last for years. That's just because there are so many steps that needs to be taken before you get to a decision that is binding. I mean, particularly when a case goes to Strasbourg, there can be years in that. So I think there's room for improvement there.
Okay, thanks, guys. And before we close off, I would love to thank our patrons, Bassthrasher, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Bryce, Deborah Grace, Sunny Shell, Aaron Coalson, and Phil Calderone, our patrons. And we thank you, patrons, for keeping this channel going with your donations. Thanks very much. And I want to thank the audience for posting the questions and being here and making this here also possible. And the panelists, y'all really shared really well. And thanks very much for being here. You really have opened our eyes to what is going on around the world, especially in your countries as to human rights. So thanks very much, everyone. And you're welcome.
Take care.
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone. Take care.
All the
Bye.
best. Bye bye.